Hey everybody, good seeing you again. Hope you've been well. I'm back, and I'm here to talk about a refugee crisis. This is the life I chose. So I'm just gonna cut to the chase. In the Myanmar episode, we talk about a lot of things, but one thing that has to be discussed, because it's made so many international headlines, is the Rohingya crisis that has happened recently. I'm sure many of you have heard about it, something about Muslims versus Buddhists. You see those pictures of like angry Buddhist monks protesting, Rohingya people leaving en masse, crossing rivers and houses on fire. What is going on? Well, this video is going to serve as kind of like a reference you can use for the Myanmar episode, kind of like what we did with the Kurdish people with the Middle Eastern countries like Iraq. First of all, let's discern what it is not. Contrary to what many media outlets will tell you, it is not an expulsion of all Muslims from Myanmar. Rohingyas are not the only Muslim group in Myanmar. There are many Muslim groups. There are even ethnic Burmese people, the largest group in Myanmar, that are Muslim. This whole conflict is mostly just centered around the Rohingya people, and they just so happen to be predominantly Muslim. So first of all, who are the Rohingya people? The Rohingya are an Indo-Aryan people group that reside in the western Rakhine state of Myanmar, close to the border of Bangladesh. They have their own language, customs, traditions, and out of all the people groups in Myanmar, they are probably the least assimilating. Most Rohingya do not read, write, or speak the Burmese language, and overall, since day one, there's just always kind of been like this clash. But how did it start? Well, first of all, this conflict isn't even really something new. It's kind of been going on for over half a century. But to really understand it, you have to go back even further in time. Historically speaking, the Rakhine state, which is where all of this is happening, was subject to many kingdoms in the past, mostly Hindu kingdoms. Eventually, in the late 18th century, the Burmese king conquered it and kind of took over. In the 1800s, Myanmar, which was called Burma back then, was subject to the British Empire. And during British Empire times, a lot of people just kind of moved back and forth between all of what are now the modern day states of the Indian subcontinent. But then in World War II, things got kind of messy. Basically, the Rohingya were allied with the British and they kind of wanted to secede their areas to East Pakistan, aka Bangladesh, but Burma was allied with the Japanese. Eventually, Burma kind of took over, war, and then they gained independence. After independence, they kind of figured with victory, the Rohingya would probably just leave and go to Bangladesh, but they kind of didn't. And this is kind of what made Burma mad, because essentially they kind of saw them as like illegal Bangladeshi immigrants. To this day, there are 135 ethnic groups recognized in Myanmar, and the largest minority groups were given their own states according to the Panlong Agreement. The Rohingya, even at over 1 million in population prior to the conflict, are not recognized by the Burmese government and have since independence been denied citizenship. For Myanmar, they basically say that under Section 3 of the Citizenship Law of 1982, it states that only members of ethnic groups that have settled within Myanmar prior to 1823 are automatically eligible for Myanmar citizenship. Otherwise, if they have descendants that have entered prior to 1948, they can apply for naturalization, but only if they can submit strong and conclusive evidence of their status. Basically, Myanmar kind of sees the Rohingyas as remnants of the British colonial past and hence ineligible for citizenship or full rights. However, on the Rohingya side, they claim to be descended from Arab traders that have settled into the area over 1,000 years ago. Granted, though, it is kind of hard for them to give concrete, solid proof of this claim, and many of the Rohingya don't even have proper documents, which adds further suspicion on Myanmar's side to believe that many of them may have just illegally crossed over from Bangladesh, whether or not it may be true. But then again, it's kind of difficult because they weren't really given paperwork to begin with, so it's kind of like this weird circular argument. But anyway, fighting has been going on post-World War II. For about 24 years, right after World War II, the Rohingya Mujahideen fought against the Burmese government. They tried to secede to Bangladesh. It didn't work out. Insurgent separatists fought again against the Burmese government in the 70s, which prompted Operation Dragon King. It was an act that attempted to register all the people in the area and expel those that were illegal. It didn't go so well. Then in the 80s, the Rohingya Solidarity Organization was formed, and it was kind of like the biggest paramilitary group for Rohingya separatists. And this is kind of the part that a lot of people miss out. There is an insurgent separatist group on the Rohingya side, and this is kind of what adds fuel to the fire. In the early 80s and 90s, they merged with another group and eventually created the current Rohingya National Army, which allegedly is supported by the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Training videos have been released. And the tipping point. If you don't know anything about Myanmar's government, they are really not pushovers, and they really don't like it when things get out of order. When it came to the Rohingya paramilitary groups, they kind of got really fed up with all of the national policies against them as non-citizens in their own hometowns, which kind of caused them to eventually snap and go on the offensive. And when that happened, it was kind of like poking a big sleeping Buddhist giant. Recently in 2017, the Burmese government conducted a security briefing, which kind of ended in a lot of Rohingya lives being lost, which then prompted an attack by the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army, another paramilitary group. They attacked over 30 Burmese police posts, and this was like right before the presentation from the international community on the Rohingya crisis. And after that happened, that was basically the beginning of the refugee crisis. Over 500,000 people had to flee the country as paramilitary forces and the Burmese government just went at an all-out brawl. Houses burned down, people malnourished, not knowing what to do, crowded in human camps seeking help. There are many reports on both sides explaining their sides of the story. Many get jumbled up in facts versus testimonies that may not be substantial, but what we do know is that many have died. Rohingya have been found killed in jungles, or they were drowned at sea trying to escape the violence. It's very messy. What it basically boils down to, though, is the Myanmar government and military fighting against the insurgent Rohingya paramilitary groups, and the Burmese military is kind of like lashing out very, very harshly, which causes hundreds of thousands of Rohingya people that didn't want anything to do with anything to suffer the most. You'll hear a lot of other sides to the story, though. Some people say that this is all about oil in the Indian Ocean off of Myanmar's coast and they want to sell it to China. Some people will say it's about radicalized Buddhism. But what it basically comes down to is you kind of have to look deep into everything that has happened and consider both sides of the entire spectrum of the story. And it's hard and it's complicated, but one thing we know is that it is never good to have war and have people suffer at the expense of it. If you would like to help out Rohingya refugees, there are currently many organizations working on the issue right now. I think Doctors Without Borders is a good one. They help out with the medical demands. And I haven't looked too much into it, but I was told BRAC is also a good one, the Bangladesh Rehabilitation Assistance Committee. If you personally know of any good, reliable, vouched programs or organizations, feel free to write them in the comments below. But until then, yeah, I tried my best to explain the situation as plain and objectively as I could. I may have missed a few notes here and there, but I hope this suffices. Thank you for watching this reference video. Hope it helped. Stay cool, stay tuned.